If you are reading this right now, you are watching something that has never happened before in the history of North America. Not in 100 years. Not ever. I am not talking about a tariff. I am not talking about a tweet. I am talking about the complete, formal, and irreversible removal of Canada from America's closest circle of trust. As of 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time this Tuesday, the United States government has officially terminated the framework of the Canada-U.S. Joint Economic Compact, a quiet but iron-strong agreement that has kept supply chains, energy pipelines, and financial systems on both sides of the border running like clockwork for over 4 decades. Donald Trump didn't just pick a fight with Canada. He cut the rope. He burned the bridge. And what came back from Ottawa in the next 3 hours is going to change every assumption you had about how the world works. Because Canada didn't beg. Canada didn't call. Canada opened a drawer, pulled out a plan that nobody in Washington even knew existed, and activated it. In the next 25 minutes, I am going to show you exactly what is inside that plan. I am going to show you the specific financial mechanisms Canada is now using to quietly drain investment out of the American economy. I am going to explain why 6 U.S. states are already in open economic rebellion against the White House. And I'm going to tell you why the generals inside the Pentagon are not sleeping tonight. Not because of Russia, not because of China, but because of a decision made by one man in the Oval Office that just left the entire northern defense corridor of the United States completely exposed. This is not a political spat. This is the moment the post-World War II order cracked open, and the crack started right here, right now, with Canada. For your whole life, the relationship between the United States and Canada has been so close, so deep, so automatic, that most Americans never even thought about it. You didn't have to. Canada was always just there, reliable, quiet, predictable. They sent oil down the pipelines. They sent lumber to build American homes. They sent auto parts to keep Detroit alive. They bought American software, American weapons systems, American culture. The plan on both sides was simple. Stay integrated, stay friendly, and the whole system hums along quietly forever. But the hidden cost of that plan was trust. Real, deep, structural trust. Canada didn't just trade with America. Canada made itself dependent on America, and for decades it accepted that dependency because it believed the relationship was permanent. They didn't build their own weapons systems because they trusted American ones. They didn't build their own financial independence because they trusted American stability. They kept the door unlocked because they believed the neighbor was friendly. Then Trump started talking about the 51st state. He started joking about taking Alberta's oil. He started threatening to use economic force to bring Canada into line. And every single time Ottawa raised a concern, Washington laughed it off. The gamble from Trump's side was clear. He assumed Canada had no exit. He assumed they were too small, too integrated, too dependent to ever truly push back. He assumed they would absorb the humiliation and keep the pipelines flowing. He assumed wrong. At 11:47 a.m. this Tuesday, the White House released a 3-paragraph statement announcing the termination of the Canada-U.S. Joint Economic Compact. No press conference, no warning, no diplomatic channel. Just 3 paragraphs posted to the official government website like a parking notice. Within 4 minutes, the Canadian dollar dropped 1.3%. Within 11 minutes, the Toronto Stock Exchange halted trading on 6 financial sector stocks. Within 22 minutes, Prime Minister Mark Carney walked to a podium in Ottawa and said 9 words that are already being quoted in finance ministries from Berlin to Tokyo. He said, "Canada does not negotiate under pressure, Canada prepares." And then he unveiled it. Operation Northern Anchor, a 94-page emergency economic sovereignty plan that Canada has apparently been building in secret for 8 months. 8 months. While Trump was tweeting about the 51st state, Canada's finance ministry, the Bank of Canada, and 3 of its largest pension funds were quietly designing a system to function without American financial infrastructure. The document allocates 31 billion Canadian dollars across 5 areas: independent energy export corridors to Europe and Asia, a domestic bond market that bypasses American clearinghouses, a new Arctic logistics network, a sovereign digital payment rail that doesn't touch the U.S. Federal Reserve System, and a fast-tracked immigration program specifically targeting American tech and medical workers who want to leave. Pause. Read that last one again. Canada is not just defending itself. Canada is now actively recruiting your engineers, your doctors, your scientists. They are not building a wall. They are building a magnet. While the White House was still processing the morning's press statement, Canada's trade minister was already on a plane to Brussels. While Trump's team was drafting a response, the premiers of British Columbia and Ontario had already convened an emergency economic council. And while the Oval Office was figuring out how to spin this as a win, three of Canada's largest pension funds, which together hold over $2.1 trillion in assets, quietly began shifting their U.S. Treasury exposure from 34% to a target floor of 19%. That is not a symbolic gesture. That is a tectonic shift in the bond market. Here is what the mainstream conversation is completely missing. The real weapon in Canada's hands is not oil, not lumber, not trade volume. It is money. Specifically, it is the money that Canada has already placed inside the American financial system over decades of deep integration. TD Bank alone operates over 100 branches across the eastern United States. Royal Bank of Canada manages pension and institutional assets for American municipalities, school districts, and state governments from Maine to Florida. Canadian pension funds own stakes in American airports, toll roads, data centers, and hospitals. According to three separate sources familiar with the situation inside Bay Street, Canada's major financial institutions were given informal guidance last Friday to begin a structured liquidity review of all U.S.-facing portfolios. That is a polite way of saying, figure out how much we can pull back and how fast, without triggering a legal dispute. A senior economist who advises one of the big five Canadian banks put it this way in a private briefing that we have now confirmed. The Americans think this is a trade dispute. They are looking at the wrong battlefield. The battlefield is capital allocation, and we are already winning it. Think about what that means in practical terms. If you are a city government in Ohio and your bond offering next quarter is underwritten with Canadian institutional capital, and that capital is being redirected to Rotterdam or Melbourne instead, your borrowing costs go up. Your roads don't get paved. Your school expansion gets delayed. The pain does not announce itself. It just quietly accumulates. And by the time the average American voter feels it, the cause will be so buried under financial jargon that nobody will be able to explain why the bill went up. This is what happens when a president who thinks in slogans picks a fight with a central banker who thinks in systems. Now we have to talk about the North, far North. Because while the financial war is invisible and the trade war is loud, there is a third war starting that has not made a single headline yet. It is happening in the Arctic. Trump has been obsessed with Arctic dominance for years. His pursuit of Greenland was never really about Greenland. It was about controlling the polar trade routes that are opening up as the ice melts, new shipping lanes, new resource access, a potential shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific that could reshape global commerce entirely. Canada controls the Northwest Passage. Canada has always controlled it. And until this week, that was a manageable tension because the two countries were fundamentally allies. Not anymore. Operation Northern Anchor includes a Section 7, that authorizes the immediate deployment of Canada's new ice-capable patrol vessels to establish what the document calls continuous sovereign presence along all disputed Arctic waterways. Translation: Canada is physically occupying the waters that America thought it had free access to. If a U.S. commercial vessel or military asset tries to transit the Northwest Passage without Canadian authorization this week, they will be met by a Canadian flag and a very polite but completely firm refusal. The U.S. Navy has used these waters freely for decades. That era ended this Tuesday. And here is where it becomes genuinely alarming. Russia is watching this in real time. Russian Arctic strategy has always been constrained by the simple fact that America and Canada operated the Northern Defense Corridor together through NORAD. Two allies, one radar system, total northern coverage. If that alliance fractures, if Canada begins pulling back intelligence sharing or restricting joint operational access, the entire northern flank of North America develops a gap. Not a theoretical gap, a real, physical, exploitable gap. The kind that Russian military planners have been trying to create for 30 years and never could because the U.S. and Canada were too united. Trump just handed them the gap for free, in exchange for not having to apologize. We have confirmed through two separate defense sources that senior U.S. military officials have been making back-channel calls to Ottawa since noon today. Not political calls, military-to-military calls. The message, according to one source with direct knowledge, was stark. Whatever is happening in Washington right now, please keep the radar on. But here is the part of this story that is moving the fastest. It is not in Ottawa. It is not in the Arctic. It is in the governor's offices of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, New York, and Vermont. 5 states. 5 Republican and Democrat governors who, within 6 hours of the White House announcement, released near identical statements. They did not condemn Trump by name. They did not need to. What they said was quieter and more devastating. They said their states would honor existing trade and infrastructure agreements with Canadian provinces regardless of federal policy. They said they were dispatching economic delegations to Canada this week. They said they were committed to protecting the jobs and supply chains of their constituents. What they were really saying was this: we are going around you. This is not normal. This does not happen in a functioning political system. Governors do not conduct independent foreign economic policy. That is not how the United States works. Except apparently now it is, because the cost of Trump's decision is not falling on Trump. It is falling on a factory owner in Flint whose Canadian steel shipment just got caught in a retaliatory customs delay. It is falling on a construction firm in Vermont whose Canadian lumber supplier just put new contracts on 60-day hold pending policy clarity. It is falling on a hospital in Minneapolis that sources medical equipment from a Canadian manufacturer who just paused all U.S.-facing orders. The Republican donors in these states are furious, not publicly, not yet. But 3 separate reports from political operatives in Ohio and Pennsylvania describe a wave of calls from major business contributors to Republican Senate offices with one message: fix this in 30 days or the money stops. Trump is cornered in a way he has not been before. He cannot back down without admitting he was wrong, and he cannot push forward without making the economic pain worse. He is a man standing on a crack in the ice, and the crack is spreading. So here is where we are right now. As of this evening, Canada has activated a sovereign economic independence plan 8 months in the making. 3 of the world's largest pension funds are quietly restructuring $2 trillion of U.S. exposure. 5 U.S. governors are conducting independent economic diplomacy with Ottawa. U.S. military officials are making secret calls begging Canada to maintain joint defense cooperation that the president just politically undermined. Arctic sovereignty is now formally contested for the first time in modern history. And the financial markets in Asia opened an hour ago with the Canadian dollar up and the U.S. dollar index sliding for the 3rd session in a row. Trump promised to make America great again. What he has done instead is make Canada independent for the first time in a generation. He forced a quiet, reliable neighbor to stop trusting him. And once that trust is gone, it does not come back. Even if Trump is gone tomorrow, even if a new president arrives in 2 years with apologies and handshakes, Canada will never unwind Operation Northern Anchor. They will never rebuild the dependency. They have learned the lesson. They are building the armor, and they are keeping it on. The American century was built on alliances, not just military ones, but economic and cultural and human ones. The idea that America was the anchor everyone else tied themselves to. That idea is being re-examined right now in every capital in the world. Europe is watching. Japan is watching. South Korea is watching. They are all running the same quiet calculation. If America did this to Canada, what would it do to us? You can control a news cycle. You cannot control a bond market. You can spin a tariff. You cannot spin a pension fund moving $2 trillion. You can ignore a document. You cannot ignore an empty pipeline. Reality is not a slogan. And right now, reality is sitting in Ottawa, wearing a suit, and it is very calmly winning. We are watching this story live every hour across the Arctic, inside the banks, and on the floors of 6 state capitals. This is not the end. This is the first chapter of something that will be written about for a very long time. Stay with us. The border is being redrawn, not with guns, with spreadsheets. And that is the kind of redrawn border that never goes back.